Hey guys, and welcome to my first actual video. Originally I was planning on just diving straight into taking photos and showing you that, but I kind of got to realizing there might be some of you who don't really have any experience as a photographer or in photography. So what I've decided to do here is just basically give an outline on a DSLR. And just so the ins and outs of it. I'll try to keep it so it's not too basic, but it's easy to understand even if you don't really know what you're doing as a photographer. So, all right, let's get started. Okay, so right here we have the Canon T3i. This is a pretty basic DSLR. It doesn't have a lot of fancy stuff to it. Right now I have the 55 to 250 millimeter stock lens that comes with it. One of the stock lenses you could get with it. It is my recommendation that you always stick to full manual. Now let me explain aperture and shutter speed and stuff like that in the ISO. So we'll start with aperture. Here, I actually have a great lens that I can use as an example. Whoop, nope, not that one. Oh no, I don't have it with me. All right, one second, I'll be right back. Okay, so I really hope I can illustrate this properly. As I twist, this particular lens has a manual on-lens aperture, yep. So you see as I twist this, there's an opening that gets smaller and smaller. That is our aperture. The higher the number, so when I put it up to 22, smaller the opening, really small opening. Now this isn't going to like block your photos or anything like that. What you're doing here is you're just letting in less light. So the higher your aperture, the less light you're going to be getting in, so the darker your photo is. Now, in addition to that, you also, as you change your aperture, you get less and more depth of field. So depth of field is, you see how it's blurry down here on the table? Down here on the table. I can't do this. Down here on the table, sorry. But over here it's clean, it's clear. Now, if I change the aperture on this camera up to 22, and we went from 8 to 22 right there, you can see now everything down here is a little bit sharper. And the reason the exposure didn't change because I have this set to automatic exposure, so it's changing the shutter speed and ISO for me automatically in order to compensate for the less light that's going in. So it's clearer down here and here. So we have less depth of field. I'm going to put it back to 8 here just because it allows it to have a lower ISO and everything. So that's aperture. I think that should be about it for that. And then as I was saying, with the lower your aperture, the smaller the number. Smaller the number, wider the hole. The wider the hole, the more depth of field you have, and the more light you have. For the vast majority of lenses, your best aperture is going to be between like 8 and 11, I believe. And so that's going to be your cleanest, the sharpest your lens is going to get. Now that doesn't mean you don't want to shoot above or below. It is fine to shoot above or below. Excuse me. You do want to be careful though, for lenses like this. If you look here, so for this particular lens, you could see up here, up here it says 1 to 1.8. That's just giving you the lowest aperture it could get. Since this is a fixed lens, it doesn't. You have a consistent aperture that you can. Fixed lens. Okay, real quick. Fixed lens means that you only have one focal length for this lens. This is a 50 millimeter lens. It is solid. This is a 55 to 250 millimeter lens. It also gives you the 1 to 4 to 5.6 is your aperture range. So at the widest angle you can get on this, so at 55 millimeters, this thing will get down to 4 aperture. When you put it into 250 though, it'll only go down to 5.6. And that is, I actually don't really know the reasoning behind that, but But as I was saying, let me get back to this. For this lens, you could go down. You can go down to 1.8 for the aperture, but you want to be really careful because if you go down that low, you can end up with some super blurry pictures just because the depth of field is so wide that it actually kind of starts to encroach upon your focus point. And when you go to apertures that wide, you can start to get your photo, even the focus point of your photo will start to look blurry. Okay, so I think that's about it for that. Now, shutter speed. When it starts showing the 2 ticks, that's not inches, that's seconds. So as you go down, it's actually going in 0.8 seconds, 1 second, 1 second, 0.3. Actually, am not positive what the rest of that there. I think it's just decimal, and then that is what it's supposed to be. But 2 seconds and stuff like that. And then when you speed it up, you start getting to the 4th, 5th, and these are literally just a 25th of a second. And I really should put this back on my camera here. And so 1,250th of a second. I'm moving too fast for me to even think. And so that's pretty self-explanatory as to how that affects your photos. The faster the shutter speed, the less light you get. And then additionally, the faster your shutter speed, the clearer a fast-moving subject is going to be. So say I'm waving my hand in front of my camera and I want to get a picture of just a clear photo of my hand, then I want to set it to a really high shutter speed so that I could pick that up quickly. And then although one interesting thing, when you don't necessarily not want it to be on a low shutter speed, because having it on a low shutter speed can actually allow you to take some really cool photos. Let me just put this so it's not like empty while I'm talking. But having it at a really low shutter speed allows you to have some really cool photos sometimes. So if you intentionally move the camera in a certain way while you're taking the photo, you could cause an interesting blurred effect to just create like a really artistic image. Or you can follow a subject, and as you're following the subject, so I have my hand in front of my camera here. If I move my camera and my hand at the same time and really quickly, and I have it on low shutter speed, then since my hand and the camera are moving the same, my hand is going to be picked up clearly. However, the background, whatever's behind my hand, is going to end up being blurred out, and so that'll give an interesting effect for to try and emulate like a fast-moving subject or something like that. And so I think that's about it for shutter speed. So higher the number, faster shutter speed, less light. Lower the number, slower shutter speed, more light, and then lower shutter speed, you get more blur. Higher shutter speed, you get less blur. And this is less just like movement blur. So not distance, not depth of field blur. Depth of field blur is only affected by your focal length. Actually, that's another thing I'll add in a second here. Your focal length and your aperture. So with your focal length, the longer your focal length, so the more zoomed in you are to something, the more depth of field you get. ISO I think is the last thing by way of exposure to explain. So ISO comes in varying degrees of depending on your camera. It could get up to like, I don't know, some ridiculous numbers like 2,500 or 250,000 or something like that. But this particular camera only gets up to 6,400. That is pretty high, actually. Usually you shouldn't need to go that high unless it's like super dark. Normally you want to shoot in the lower ISO ranges because, so I'm just going to take a photo real quick here at 100 ISO. So as we zoom into the first one, as I said, you could see the color, everything's accurate. But as you zoom into the second one, you see a lot of what we call noise. For digital cameras, it's noise. For film cameras, it's grain. The weird color distortions and the softness around the edges of everything is just nowhere near as clear. And And so that's the trade-off you get when you use higher ISOs. And if I didn't already say this, the higher ISO you go, the brighter your picture is, because it's the light sensitivity. ISO doesn't get lower than 100. Some cameras can't even go down to 100. Some of them are stuck at 200. Like the one that I'm currently recording with doesn't go any lower than 200. The ISO you want to use for your camera really differs between your camera, between cameras, because this particular camera, this T3i, you don't really want to go above 400 ISO on the T3i. Granted, this is an older camera, and it's the G7 is the one I'm recording with. Much nicer, and you could safely go around more of 800, maybe even 1600 on the G7, but 400 is pretty much the max you want to go on T3i before it really starts affecting your photos and you really start to see it. And when you go 800 to 6400, obviously, as I said, some cameras are more forgiving. The king of low light. It's a really good camera. I'll put the name up on the screen, but that particular camera, you can go to really high ISOs. I want to say you can go to like 6400 at least, without really getting too detrimental losses on your photos. But yeah, I think that's about it for ISO. Just one thing you want to be careful with if you want to set it to auto, is that just make sure that your shutter speed and your aperture aren't like at ridiculous things that cause the ISO to be just pushed up way too high and just ruin your photos. Really, I just want to say one thing. Make sure you know your camera. Don't just pick it up, set it on manual, and then say, okay, I know everything about my camera because I can change the aperture, shutter speed, ISO, and focal length and focus however I want. Make sure that you understand all the features of your camera, because sometimes you'll find something on your camera and you'll come to realize that it's actually ridiculously useful, and you really miss out if you don't understand the full capabilities of your camera. And then as I mentioned just a second ago, focus. There is not a lot of reason not to use autofocus. Autofocus is, for most cameras nowadays, it's really clean, it's pretty fast. You're not really going to lose out on anything. The only reason I would say set yourself to manual focus is if you're, say you're taking pictures at an event and there's a lot of people and they're at a lot of different distances and you're zooming in a lot, then your camera's going to might start getting confused as to what you want to focus on, and so you're going to get focus on the wrong people, the wrong spots, the wrong items, and you're just going to miss a lot of photos. So in those kind of cases, then you want to use manual. Also, if you're doing macro photography, if you're getting really close to stuff, you're going to definitely want to use manual, just because you get a lot more creativity in your photo, and obviously the camera isn't the artist. The camera's not going to say, okay, the best looking focus for this photo would be right here on the edge of the petal of this flower. So you're going to want to use manual focus for stuff like that. I think that's about it for just the basics of a DSLR and a few tips on how to shoot and stuff like that. If you have any questions, put them down in the comments. If something wasn't clear, put them down as well. I'll respond. I'll try my best to respond. I should be able to get back to you pretty quickly if you're confused about anything. If you have any suggestions for things you want to see, go ahead and put those in the comments as well. I hope to see you in the next video as well. Well, I guess I don't really see you, but I hope you'll be around in the next video, and thank you for watching.